The summer of 1966 shimmered with an almost unbearable tension, a heat that had little to do with the weather and everything to do with the roar of the Wembley crowd. On that sweltering July day, two titans of football, England and West Germany, clashed in the World Cup final, a spectacle that promised glory and heartbreak in equal measure. For England, the stakes were monumental. A nation starved of international football success yearned for a triumph on home soil, a moment to etch into the annals of history. The air crackled with patriotic fervor, a sea of red and white flags waving frantically as millions held their breath, their hopes riding on 11 men. Across the pitch, the West German squad, a formidable force of discipline and skill, stood ready to challenge this destiny, their own national pride burning fiercely. Every pass, every tackle, every shot was magnified, carrying the weight of an entire country's aspirations. The game itself was a relentless ballet of athletic prowess and tactical cunning, each team pushing the other to its limits. Then, in the 101st minute of extra time, with the score precariously balanced at 2-2, the world held its breath. Geoff Hurst, the English forward, unleashed a powerful shot. The ball cannoned off the underside of the crossbar, bounced downwards, and spun back into play. For a fleeting, agonizing second, time seemed to stand still. The linesman, Tofik Bahramov from Azerbaijan, sprinted towards the halfway line, signaling a goal. A collective gasp swept through the stadium, immediately followed by an explosion of sound. English fans erupted in a delirium of joy, their cheers echoing across London, a wave of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. Yet, on the German bench, a different emotion festered: disbelief. Then, outrage. The German players, their faces contorted in protest, swarmed the referee, Jack Taylor, pointing furiously at the spot where the ball had supposedly crossed the line. Their arguments were passionate, their conviction unwavering. It hadn't gone in. The ball, they insisted, had bounced on the line, not over it. Confusion reigned, a chaotic swirl of jubilation and furious contention. The referee, after a brief consultation with his linesman, upheld the decision. The ghost goal, as it would forever be known, stood. The immediate aftermath was a blur of conflicting emotions. For England, it was the moment their dreams came true, a pivotal strike that paved the way for their 4-2 victory and their first, and to date, only World Cup title. For West Germany, it was a bitter pill, a perceived injustice that tainted an otherwise valiant effort. The image of the ball bouncing, the linesman's decisive run, the referee's unwavering stance, all burned themselves into the collective memory, a wound that would never quite heal. In the years and decades that followed, the debate raged on, fueled by slow-motion replays, scientific analyses, and endless discussions in pubs and living rooms. Was it in, or was it not? The lingering doubts, the tantalizing uncertainty, became an inseparable part of the legend. Among the millions watching that fateful match was a young German boy, barely 10 years old, huddled with his family around a flickering black-and-white television set. His name, though not yet important, was a vessel for the burgeoning indignation he felt. He had cheered every German attack, winced at every English advance, his small heart pounding with the rhythm of the game. When Hurst's shot hit the bar, his breath hitched. When the linesman signaled the goal, a cold dread seized him. He watched, bewildered, as his father cursed, his mother gasped, and the faces of his older brothers hardened with a shared sense of betrayal. He saw the anguish on the faces of the German players, the raw frustration radiating from the screen. He heard the commentators' hesitant, almost apologetic tones as they discussed the controversial call. In that moment, something shifted within the boy. It wasn't just a football game, it was an injustice, a wrong that had been inflicted upon his country, upon his heroes. A seed of resentment, small but potent, was planted deep within his young mind. He didn't fully understand the complexities of international football or the nuances of refereeing decisions, but he understood unfairness. He felt the sting of it, the burning desire for justice. That day, the boy vowed silently, almost unconsciously, that one day, somehow, the truth would come out. He didn't know how or when or what form his quest would take, but the conviction was absolute. The ghost goal, that phantom touch of the ball beyond the line, became more than just a moment in a game. It became a personal affront, a historical riddle that demanded a solution. The question lingered, a persistent echo in the back of his mind. Was it truly a goal? And if not, who was responsible for allowing such a monumental error to stand? The shadow of '66 had fallen, long and dark, and for this young German fan, it would define a lifetime. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The shadow cast by that Wembley afternoon stretched far beyond the confines of the stadium, enveloping the young German fan's entire existence. Decades had passed since that fateful day, transforming the wide-eyed boy into a man. Yet the memory of the 1966 final remained as vivid and raw as if it had occurred just yesterday. The perceived injustice had not faded with time. Instead, it had deepened, solidifying into a profound conviction that demanded resolution. His life, in subtle yet undeniable ways, had been sculpted by that pivotal moment. He pursued a degree in history, specializing in sports sociology, a field that allowed him to dissect the cultural impact of athletic events, always with a subconscious pull towards the ghost goal. His academic pursuits became a thinly veiled extension of his personal quest, a methodical approach to understanding the mechanics of historical narrative and, more specifically, how certain narratives could be manipulated or misconstrued. He had become an avid collector of anything related to the 1966 World Cup, his study resembling a meticulously organized archive. Old newspaper clippings yellowed with age, grainy photographs, forgotten match programs, even obscure academic papers discussing the physics of ball trajectory. Each piece was a fragment of a larger puzzle he was determined to solve. The persistent debate surrounding the ghost goal had become a constant hum in the background of his life, a low-frequency vibration that resonated deeply within him. Every anniversary of the final would inevitably reignite the discussion, with pundits and fans alike rehashing the same arguments, projecting the same fuzzy replays, and arriving at the same inconclusive stalemate. Yet, for him, there was no stalemate. There was only a wrong that needed to be righted, a historical footnote that, in his eyes, was a gaping wound. His deep-seated belief that Germany had been wronged was not born of jingoism or a desire to diminish England's triumph. It stemmed from a purer, more academic conviction in the integrity of the game and the unblemished truth of historical events. He saw the ghost goal not merely as a controversial decision, but as a potential systemic failure, a moment where the powerful narrative of the host nation's destiny might have overshadowed factual accuracy. This belief fueled his growing obsession with finding definitive proof, something irrefutable that would silence the doubters and validate his lifelong conviction. He wasn't looking for revenge, he was searching for vindication, for the objective truth that had eluded countless analyses. His relentless pursuit, however, was not without its intellectual adversaries. Across the North Sea, an equally determined figure emerged as his unwitting rival. an aging English football historian, a man whose life's work revolved around the glorification of English football and, crucially, the staunch defense of the 1966 Ghost goal. This historian, a widely respected figure in British sports academia, had penned numerous articles and books unequivocally asserting the legitimacy of Hurst's strike. For him, the Ghost goal was not a controversy, but a testament to England's rightful victory, an emblem of national pride that he fiercely protected from any revisionist attempts. Their paths had not yet directly crossed, but their opposing viewpoints formed a brewing intellectual conflict, a silent battle waged across academic journals and media interviews. The German character viewed the historian as an obstacle, a gatekeeper of a convenient narrative, while the English historian likely saw the German's persistent questioning as a tiresome, unpatriotic grievance. One dreary autumn afternoon, buried deep within the digital archives of an obscure sports journal from the late 1970s, the German character stumbled upon something that made his heart pound with a forgotten intensity. It wasn't a smoking gun, not yet, but it was a glimmer, a tantalizing thread leading into the labyrinth of the past. It was a brief, almost overlooked interview with a former FIFA official, long since deceased, who had been peripherally involved in the refereeing appointments for the 1966 tournament. The official, in a moment of what seemed like candid reflection, hinted at external pressures and unforeseen considerations that complicated certain decisions during major international events. The interview quickly veered into other topics, but those few cryptic sentences lodged themselves in the German's mind like a stubborn splinter. This wasn't the definitive proof he craved, but it was a revelation nonetheless. It suggested that the narrative around the Ghost goal might not be as straightforward as official accounts had always maintained. It hinted at a layer of complexity, perhaps even deliberate obfuscation, that transcended the simple error of a linesman. The German character felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't merely about a ball crossing a line. It was about the mechanisms of power, the subtle influences that could shape history. The forgotten archive, this obscure interview, had just opened a door, revealing a corridor he never knew existed. His quest, once a personal obsession, now felt like a historical imperative. The truth, he realized, might be far more intricate and far more unsettling than he had ever dared to imagine. The cryptic interview served as a catalyst, propelling the German character into an intense, almost feverish investigation. He devoted every waking hour, and often many hours that should have been for sleep, to unearthing the true story behind the Ghost goal. His meticulously organized study transformed into a war room. Maps of old Wembley Stadium spread across his desk, highlighted timelines charting the movements of key officials, and stacks of documents threatening to overwhelm the space. He delved into dusty archives, both physical and digital, poring over microfilmed newspapers, obscure Football Federation minutes, and forgotten academic theses. Each old film reel he managed to procure, often from private collectors or forgotten university libraries, was meticulously scrutinized, frame by agonizing frame, searching for an angle, a detail, anything that had been missed in the countless analyses over the decades. He sought out witness testimonies, tracking down former journalists, retired groundskeepers, and even some of the few surviving spectators who had been seated in the exact section of the stadium closest to the goal. Many were frail, their memories clouded by time, but a few offered tantalizing fragments of information. A hushed conversation overheard, a strange glance exchanged between officials, a fleeting impression of confusion that had been quickly suppressed by the roar of the crowd. He cross-referenced every detail, every conflicting account, building a complex mosaic of the events leading up to and immediately following Jeff Hurst's controversial shot. The deeper he dug, the more he encountered subtle hints of potential cover-ups, of deliberate misinterpretations woven into the fabric of the official narrative. It wasn't always outright lies, but rather omissions, selective highlighting, and the powerful influence of national sentiment shaping collective memory. This relentless pursuit exacted a heavy emotional toll. His personal life, already secondary to his academic endeavors, began to recede further into the background. Friends worried about his gaunt appearance and the single-minded intensity in his eyes. His loved ones expressed concern, urging him to step back, to find balance, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. For him, this was no longer just an academic exercise, it was a moral imperative, a quest for justice that transcended personal comfort. He made significant personal sacrifices for the sake of his quest. He liquidated a substantial portion of his savings to fund travel to England, to pay for access to restricted archives, and to compensate for the significant time away from his teaching duties, which he reduced to the bare minimum. The financial strain was immense, but the potential reward, the unveiling of a long-held secret, dwarfed any monetary cost in his mind. His initial findings, meticulously compiled into a preliminary report, were met with predictable skepticism. He had attempted to present some of his emerging theories in a minor academic forum, hinting at the systemic issues he was uncovering. The reaction was swift and dismissive, particularly from the established figures in sports history. The English football historian, his intellectual adversary, caught wind of these nascent claims through his extensive network. He publicly dismissed the Germans' findings as conspiracy-mongering and unpatriotic revisionism, further solidifying his position as the staunch defender of the ghost goal's legitimacy. He penned a scathing counter-article in a widely read football magazine, ridiculing the notion that anything untoward could have occurred. This dismissal, however, did not deter the German character. Instead, it fueled his resolve, hardening his conviction that he was on the right track. The more vehemently his claims were rejected without thorough examination, the more he felt he was threatening a carefully constructed facade. A chance encounter, almost poetic in its timing, occurred during an international sports history conference in Geneva. The German character, presenting a paper on the broader cultural impact of controversial sporting decisions, found himself in the same reception hall as the English football historian. Their eyes met across a crowded room, a silent acknowledgement of their long-standing, unspoken intellectual battle. The historian, a man whose public persona radiated an air of unshakable academic authority, offered a curt, almost disdainful nod. The German, however, saw past the bravado, sensing a flicker of unease, a subtle shift in the historian's usually impenetrable demeanor. He approached the older man, extending a hand. "Professor," he began, his voice calm despite the tremor of anticipation, "I believe we have much to discuss regarding 1966. The English historian's grip was surprisingly weak. "Young man," he retorted, his voice tinged with a patronizing tone intended to dismiss, "the matter of 1966 has been settled for decades. There is nothing left to discuss, only to accept." "Perhaps," the German replied, his gaze unwavering, "but what if the acceptance was built upon an incomplete foundation? What if there are pieces of the puzzle that have been deliberately overlooked?" He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. "I believe I am close to finding one such piece, a critical detail that could change everything." The English historian's facade momentarily cracked. A flash of genuine concern, quickly masked by annoyance, crossed his face. He scoffed, turning away abruptly. Nonsense! Pure, speculative nonsense! But his words lacked their usual conviction. The German character watched him walk away, a faint smile playing on his lips. He knew he had struck a nerve. The critical piece of evidence, though still elusive in its entirety, was no longer merely a theoretical construct. He could feel its presence, almost taste its truth, lurking just beyond his grasp, promising to shatter the long-held narrative of Wembley. The German character, emboldened by the English historian's fleeting moment of discomfort, continued his relentless pursuit. He understood that to truly challenge the entrenched narrative, he needed more than just archival evidence. He needed an insider, someone who understood the mechanics of the system that had allowed the truth to remain buried for so long. His exhaustive research into FIFA's historical records, cross-referencing names and dates, eventually led him to a name that recurred frequently in the periphery of the 1966 World Cup organizational committees, a name that later vanished from public view. A former FIFA official, now living in quiet retirement in a secluded Swiss village. The journey to the official's modest chalet was long and arduous, both physically and emotionally. The German character felt a mixture of hope and trepidation, knowing that this encounter could either be the breakthrough he desperately sought or another dead end, another brick in the wall of silence. When he finally stood before the heavy wooden door, his heart pounded with anticipation. The man who answered was frail, his eyes clouded with the wisdom and weariness of advanced age, but a spark of something resilient remained. Initially, the former FIFA official was wary, his responses guarded, filled with the practiced evasiveness of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous currents of international politics. He dismissed the German character's inquiries as the fanciful notions of a misguided academic. However, the German's unwavering conviction, his meticulous presentation of the discrepancies he had already uncovered, slowly chipped away at the official's carefully constructed defenses. He spoke not of conspiracy theories, but of the human element, of pressures and motivations that shaped decisions behind closed doors. "Young man," the official finally confessed, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "you speak of truth. But truth, in those circles, is often a matter of convenience, of political expediency. There were immense pressures, not just from the English FA, but from within FIFA itself. The global stage, the prestige, the financial implications. A rapid decision was needed, and a decision that favored the host nation was, shall we say, less problematic for all involved. He revealed a world where national pride, commercial interests, and the desire for a smooth, controversy-free tournament often overshadowed the strict adherence to impartiality. He spoke of hushed conversations, of gentlemen's agreements that had nothing to do with fair play, and of subtle directives passed down from above. He recounted how the line judges, under immense pressure and without the benefit of instant replay, were effectively coerced into confirming the goal, their initial doubts quickly silenced by the roar of the crowd and the urgency of the moment. The official did not claim a malicious plot, but rather a confluence of circumstances, political will, and human fallibility that converged to create an irreversible, convenient narrative. A bond began to form between the two men, an unlikely alliance forged in the shared desire for historical rectification. The former official, burdened by decades of silent complicity, found a measure of catharsis in sharing his story, his conscience finally stirring after so long. He provided the German character with invaluable insights, pointing him towards forgotten memos, obscure protocols, and the names of other individuals who might corroborate his claims, albeit indirectly. He explained the internal pressures, the political motivations that had influenced the swift decision, and the subsequent efforts to cement the goal's legitimacy in the annals of football history, making it almost sacrilege to question. Meanwhile, back in England, the English football historian, increasingly aware of the Germans' persistent inquiries, intensified his counter-arguments. He published a series of articles in popular sports journals, each more vehement than the last, meticulously dissecting every known angle of the ghost goal, presenting what he considered irrefutable photographic and anecdotal evidence for its validity. He framed the Germans' work as a desperate attempt to rewrite history, driven by nationalistic bitterness. His public pronouncements grew sharper, his intellect weaponized against what he perceived as a threat to a cherished national myth. He even appeared on television programs, eloquently defending the official narrative, his authority and reputation lending immense weight to his arguments. The German character, armed with new understanding, found himself facing an ethical dilemma. The former FIFA official had entrusted him with sensitive information, much of it gleaned from confidential internal documents. Releasing it would undoubtedly expose the official to severe criticism, potentially tarnishing his legacy, even if he was now seeking to right a historical wrong. Was the pursuit of absolute truth worth the potential damage to an individual, even one who had been part of the system? He wrestled with these questions, the weight of his quest pressing down on him. There were moments of profound doubt and fear. The stakes were rising, and he realized he was no longer just an academic. He was a disruptor, directly challenging a powerful, established order. He began to receive anonymous threats, veiled warnings to cease his investigation, further solidifying his understanding of the forces at play. Then, just as the German character felt he was on the cusp of a major breakthrough, the unexpected happened. The former FIFA official, his newfound ally, suddenly became unreachable. Calls went unanswered, emails bounced back, and a subsequent visit to his remote Swiss chalet found it empty. A chilling silence hanging in the air. The official had simply vanished, leaving no trace, no forwarding address. The German character's heart sank. Had he been compromised? Silenced? The abrupt disappearance sent a cold shiver down his spine, confirming his fears that he was dealing with forces far more powerful and insidious than he had initially imagined. This betrayal, or perhaps more accurately, this disappearance under suspicious circumstances, was a devastating blow. It stripped him of his most valuable direct source, leaving him isolated once more. But it also solidified his conviction. The true extent of the conspiracy, or at least the elaborate lengths to which certain individuals and institutions would go to protect the established narrative, began to emerge with grim clarity. The ghost goal, he now understood, was not just a mistake. It was a carefully guarded secret, a cornerstone of a national identity, and challenging it meant challenging the very foundations of that identity. He was alone, but more determined than ever. The truth, he knew, was still out there, waiting to be fully unearthed. The German character, now truly isolated but fueled by an unyielding resolve, understood that the traditional avenues of investigation were no longer sufficient. The disappearance of the former FIFA official was not merely a setback. It was a stark warning, a chilling testament to the power he was up against. He realized that to continue his quest for truth, he had to change tactics, to move from meticulous, private research to a more public, albeit anonymous, dissemination of his findings. He possessed fragments, pieces of a larger puzzle that, even incomplete, could ignite a firestorm of doubt. Working late into the nights, his apartment dimly lit, he meticulously compiled a dossier. It wasn't a complete exposé, but rather a carefully curated selection of the most damning inconsistencies and previously unreleased details gleaned from the official and his own research. He focused on the discrepancies in the official reports, the hurried nature of the decision-making process, and the subtle yet undeniable pressure exerted on the officials at Wembley. He included veiled references to the political and financial stakes involved, enough to hint at a deeper manipulation without explicitly revealing his sources, especially not the vanished official. He crafted a compelling narrative designed to catch the attention of a skeptical public and the ever-hungry media. With a trembling hand, he anonymously leaked his findings to several prominent international sports journalists and investigative news outlets. He used encrypted channels, ensuring his digital footprint was untraceable, a ghost in the machine. He attached a short, cryptic message. "The ghost of 1966 demands its truth. These are but shadows of what truly lies beneath." The football world, accustomed to the occasional historical debate, initially reacted with a mix of skepticism and dismissive sighs. Another claim about the ghost goal? They had heard it all before. However, the sheer volume of the leaked information, coupled with its unprecedented detail and the subtle hints of institutional cover-up, began to chip away at the apathy. One newspaper, known for its tenacious investigative journalism, decided to run with the story, albeit cautiously. The headline was provocative. "New Revelations Reignite 1966 Ghost Goal Controversy. Was Wembley's most famous moment a lie?" Suddenly, the debate was no longer confined to academic circles or pub arguments. It exploded onto social media, into sports forums, and onto television talk shows. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and they were germinating rapidly. Fans from across the globe, especially those who had long felt a sense of injustice about the 1966 final, latched onto the leaks, demanding answers. The narrative shifted from "was it a goal?" to "why was it so definitively declared a goal despite overwhelming uncertainty?" The English football historian, initially dismissive, found himself under increasing pressure. His phone rang incessantly, journalists demanding his response to these new findings. He vehemently tried to discredit the leaks, labeling them as unsubstantiated rumors, the desperate machinations of a disgruntled few. He appeared on television, his face flushed with indignation, accusing the German character of attempting to sully a glorious national triumph with baseless conspiracy theories. He presented his meticulously compiled counterarguments, citing his own extensive research and the widely accepted version of events. Yet, even as he spoke, a flicker of uncertainty could be seen in the eyes of his interviewers, and the questions from the public grew increasingly pointed. The historian's usual unwavering authority was beginning to waver, and the public, once so trusting, now had reason to question. The German character watched from the shadows, a grim satisfaction mingling with a growing sense of unease. His actions had stirred the hornet's nest, and the hornets were now circling. The anonymous threats, which had briefly subsided after the official's disappearance, now intensified. He found cryptic messages taped to his door, his email inbox filled with hate mail, and even a strange incident where his car tires were slashed. He knew these were not random acts. They were calculated attempts to intimidate him, to force him to retreat. The drama surrounding him escalated, transforming his academic pursuit into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. His family, observing his increasing paranoia and the dark circles under his eyes, grew deeply concerned. His mother, her voice laced with worry, pleaded with him to stop. "Is this worth it, my son? Your health? Your safety? This obsession is consuming you." His loved ones feared for his well-being, urging him to abandon a quest that seemed to bring him nothing but danger and isolation. They saw a man driven by a singular purpose, losing himself in the shadows of a decades-old controversy. These pleas, these warnings, however, had an unexpected effect. Instead of deterring him, they cemented his resolve. He looked at the worried faces of his family, and he saw not just their fear, but the reflection of a deeper injustice that had festered for generations. This was no longer just about a football match. It was about integrity, about rectifying a historical wrong that had cast a long shadow over his nation's sporting narrative. He felt a profound emotional turning point, a hardening of his will. He was not just seeking vindication for Germany, but for truth itself, a truth that had been buried under layers of convenience and nationalistic fervor. He knew he was close, tantalizingly close, to the final, undeniable piece of evidence. The leaks had created the necessary chaos. The public outcry had opened doors that were previously bolted shut. Now, with the world's eyes once again fixed on the ghost goal, he felt a renewed urgency. He had one last lead, one last thread to pull, hinted at by the vanished official in their final hushed conversations. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but he knew in his heart it was the key. Somewhere, hidden away, was the definitive proof, the missing puzzle piece that would silence all doubt and expose the full extent of the truth. He would find it, no matter the cost. The German character, his senses heightened by the escalating threats and the palpable shift in public opinion, pursued his final lead with a singular, almost feverish intensity. The vanished official, in their last brief and hurried communication, had alluded to a specific individual, an unassuming former groundskeeper at Wembley, who had, by sheer accident, captured an unparalleled perspective of the infamous goal. This groundskeeper, now an elderly man living in quiet obscurity, possessed not just a memory, but a physical artifact, a small Super 8 film camera, which he had used to record snippets of the match from his unique vantage point near the goal line. A perspective unmarred by the official broadcast cameras. Locating the man proved challenging, a testament to his desire for anonymity after decades of silence. But the German character, using every investigative skill he had honed, eventually found him in a secluded village, far from the clamor of the football world. The initial encounter was fraught with suspicion. The old groundskeeper was wary, guarded, having lived with the secret for so long, fearing repercussions he could barely articulate. He spoke of hushed warnings, of being advised to keep silent, of a quiet understanding that some truths were best left undisturbed for the sake of national pride. But the German character, through a patient and empathetic recounting of his own decades-long quest, of the injustice that had haunted generations, slowly chipped away at the old man's defenses. He spoke not of blame or retribution, but of historical accuracy, of setting the record straight for future generations. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 60 years, the groundskeeper produced the small, battered Super 8 camera and a canister of film. The German character felt a tremor of anticipation, a culmination of his life's work. He carefully transported the fragile film to a specialized laboratory, where experts meticulously digitized and enhanced the footage. What emerged was breathtaking, undeniable. The film, shot from a low, precise angle, showed Jeff Hurst's shot striking the underside of the crossbar, bouncing down, and crucially, landing clearly outside the goal line before spinning back into play. The angle was absolute, leaving no room for doubt, no space for interpretation. The ghost goal was, unequivocally, not a goal. With this ultimate proof in hand, the German character knew he could no longer operate in the shadows. The time for anonymous leaks was over. He arranged for a global press conference, meticulously choosing a neutral venue and inviting media from every major footballing nation. The announcement was simple. He possessed definitive, irrefutable evidence regarding the 1966 World Cup Final's most controversial moment. The world's attention, already piqued by his earlier leaks, now converged with unprecedented intensity. The English football historian, hearing the news, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The ground beneath his feet, which had once felt so solid with historical precedent and national conviction, was now crumbling. He had dismissed the leaks, fought against the rising tide of doubt, but the tone of this new announcement, the German character's unshakable confidence, suggested something far more substantial than mere speculation. He knew, deep down, that his long-held beliefs, his entire professional life's work defending that moment, was about to face its ultimate challenge. He appeared on television one last time before the press conference, his usual bravado replaced by a noticeable tremor in his voice, his eyes darting nervously. He tried to frame the upcoming revelation as merely another attempt to rewrite history, but even his most ardent supporters could hear the desperation in his plea. The day of the press conference arrived, a day that would forever alter the landscape of football history. The room was packed, a sea of journalists, cameras flashing, microphones bristling. The German character, outwardly calm but inwardly a whirlwind of emotion, stepped onto the podium. He began by recounting the decades of debate, the lingering pain, and his personal journey. Then, with a dramatic pause that held the entire world captive, he unveiled the enhanced Super 8 footage. The silent, grainy images flickered across massive screens, showing the ball's trajectory, the impact, and the undeniable landing point outside the line. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a stunned silence. There was no argument, no ambiguity. The truth, undeniable and stark, was laid bare. As the footage concluded, a low murmur began to spread, growing into a cacophony of questions and exclamations. It was then that a peripheral figure, an aging man who had been a junior linesman at the 1966 final, present in the audience by chance, rose shakily from his seat. His face was ashen, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He pushed through the crowd, his voice barely a whisper. "It's true. I saw it. I knew it. But the pressure, the noise, they told us. For England. Oh God, forgive me." His impromptu, emotional confession, a desperate plea for absolution after half a century of guilt, added another layer of devastating authenticity to the revelation. He spoke of the overwhelming atmosphere, the roar of the crowd, the fear of making a decision that would defy the national will, and the subtle yet powerful directives from higher-ups to ensure a favorable outcome for the host nation. The weight of history, of national identity, hung heavy in the air. The truth about the ghost goal was not just revealed, it was brutally, definitively confirmed. The specific details of how this truth was suppressed for decades began to emerge from the linesman's broken words and the German character's meticulous research. It was not a grand, malicious conspiracy, but a confluence of factors: human error under immense pressure, nationalistic fervor overriding objective judgment, and a subsequent institutional desire to protect a cherished national narrative. The world watched, aghast, as a cornerstone of English footballing legend crumbled, replaced by the stark, uncomfortable reality of a historical injustice. The world reeled. News channels across the globe broadcast the Super 8 footage repeatedly, dissecting every frame, every angle. Commentators, historians, and former players offered their stunned analyses. Shock gave way to a wave of disappointment in England, a sense of betrayal that resonated through generations who had grown up celebrating the iconic moment. For Germany, there was a complex mix of vindication and a melancholic acknowledgement of a truth long suspected, but never officially confirmed. The ghost goal once a symbol of English triumph and German grievance, now stood as a monument to human fallibility and the intricate dance between national pride and historical accuracy. The German character, standing at the epicenter of this global earthquake, felt a strange, hollow victory. The decades of relentless pursuit, the sacrifices, the emotional toll, all had culminated in this moment of undeniable truth. Yet, the anticipated euphoria was muted, replaced by a profound weariness. He had sought justice, and he had found it, but the weight of shattering such a monumental illusion bore heavily upon him. He watched the reactions unfold, the impassioned debates, the sorrowful reflections, and understood that while he had corrected the historical record, he had also inadvertently caused widespread pain. His triumph was bittersweet, a testament to the fact that truth, while liberating, could also be deeply unsettling. Across the Channel, the English football historian was a broken man. The public confession of the former linesman, coupled with the unassailable visual evidence, had utterly demolished his life's work. He had dedicated his career to defending the legitimacy of that goal, building a reputation on its unwavering truth. Now, his arguments lay in ruins, his academic integrity questioned, his national pride wounded. He retreated from the public eye, the media's relentless scrutiny too much to bear. In the quiet solitude of his study, surrounded by dusty tomes and framed photographs of footballing legends, he wrestled with the shattering of his long-held beliefs. It wasn't just the goal, it was the entire narrative he had embraced, the foundation of his professional identity. He felt a profound sense of loss, a disorientation that left him adrift in a sea of newfound uncertainty. The world he knew, the history he had championed, had irrevocably changed. A few weeks later, amidst the ongoing global discussion, a quiet, almost unnoticed gesture of reconciliation emerged. FIFA, in a carefully worded statement, acknowledged the new evidence and expressed regret for the long-standing controversy. While they stopped short of overturning the 1966 result, recognizing the impossibility and futility of such an act decades later, their statement included a subtle yet significant footnote in the official records, acknowledging the historical ambiguity surrounding the second English goal. It was a diplomatic maneuver, certainly, but it carried immense symbolic weight, a tacit admission that the German character's tireless quest had indeed corrected a historical error. For the German character, this acknowledgement marked a personal turning point. The institutional recognition, however nuanced, offered a sense of closure that the public outcry alone could not provide. He had not sought to rewrite history in a destructive manner, but to illuminate it with accuracy. The formal acknowledgement from football's governing body validated his efforts, confirming that his relentless pursuit was not merely an act of nationalistic grievance, but a genuine contribution to historical integrity. The impact on the legacy of the 1966 World Cup was profound. The victory remained England's, etched in the annals of football history, but it was now viewed through a different lens. The narrative shifted from an unqualified triumph to a more complex story, one that acknowledged the controversy and the human elements that shaped it. The ghost goal became a powerful cautionary tale, a reminder of the subjective nature of perception, the immense pressure of high-stakes competition, and the enduring power of a single moment to influence history. It sparked renewed discussions about the introduction of technology in football, a debate that had simmered for decades, but now gained renewed urgency and widespread support. The true cost of this revelation was deeply personal for many. For the English football historian, it was the dismantling of a lifetime's conviction, a painful re-evaluation of his own role in perpetuating a flawed narrative. For the German character, It was the quiet burden of his own bitter-sweet vindication, the understanding that truth, however vital, often comes at a price. For the countless fans who had celebrated or mourned that goal for over half a century, it was a moment of collective introspection, a re-examination of their own cherished memories and beliefs. Yet, amidst the initial shock and disappointment, a new understanding began to emerge. There was a sense of collective catharsis, an opportunity to finally move past a lingering historical wound. The revelation, while challenging, ultimately fostered a deeper appreciation for the complexities of sports history and the relentless pursuit of accuracy. It underlined the idea that even in the most celebrated moments, the full truth might take decades to surface, patiently awaiting its champion. The ghost of 1966, long a spectral presence haunting Anglo-German football relations, had finally been confronted, its ethereal form brought into sharp, undeniable focus. The painful clarity offered a pathway, however challenging, toward a more honest and reconciled future. The former linesman, whose impromptu confession had been a poignant highlight of the press conference, found a measure of peace in his final years. His guilt, a heavy cloak he had worn for decades, had finally been lifted. He spoke publicly several times after the initial revelation, not seeking fame, but offering a humble, heartfelt apology to the German people and a plea for understanding from his own countrymen. His story became a powerful subplot to the larger narrative, a human face to the immense pressure and moral compromise that can occur in moments of national fervor. His words, filled with regret, but also a newfound sense of liberation, resonated deeply, adding a layer of human empathy to the stark historical correction. The episode, while initially divisive, ultimately opened a space for dialogue and reflection, paving the way for a more nuanced understanding of a pivotal moment in sporting history. The long-term effects of the truth being revealed rippled through the football world, extending far beyond the immediate shockwaves. It wasn't merely a correction of a score, but a re-evaluation of how history itself is constructed and maintained. For the German character, the initial weariness slowly gave way to a profound sense of closure. The obsessive drive that had consumed decades of his life began to recede, leaving behind a quiet satisfaction. He had not sought glory or personal gain, only truth, and in its unveiling, he found a peace he hadn't realized he was missing. His pursuit had been a solitary journey, often misunderstood, occasionally ridiculed, but ultimately vindicated. He began to channel his meticulous research skills into other historical projects, albeit ones with far less emotional weight, finding a new purpose in shedding light on forgotten narratives, no longer driven by a personal wound, but by a genuine passion for accuracy. He understood that his life's defining quest had ended, and in its wake, a new, more balanced chapter had begun, marked by tranquility and a scholarly pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. The English football historian, after his initial retreat, slowly re-emerged, a changed man. The shattering of his foundational belief had been agonizing, but it also offered an unexpected liberation. The rigid defenses he had built around the 1966 narrative had crumbled, allowing new perspectives to seep in. He began to engage with the revised history, not as a defender of a lost cause, but as a scholar striving for a more complete understanding. His later works, while still deeply rooted in English football history, displayed a newfound humility and a willingness to critically examine previously unquestioned assumptions. He even penned an essay, published in a respected historical journal, acknowledging the complexities of the 1966 final and the profound impact of the German character's findings. It was a testament to his intellectual integrity, a painful but necessary amendment to his own historical record. He found a different kind of respect, one earned not through staunch defense, but through honest self-reflection and scholarly adaptation. The story concluded with a profound message: honesty, perseverance, and the enduring power of truth. It demonstrated that even injustices buried under decades of national pride and collective memory can eventually surface, if only one individual is brave enough to dig. The narrative became a powerful allegory, resonating beyond the confines of sports, speaking to the universal human quest for fairness and accuracy. It underscored the idea that history is not static. It is a living, breathing entity, constantly being re-evaluated and refined by new evidence and perspectives. A symbolic act of closure unfolded during a youth football tournament held jointly in Germany and England, a few years after the revelation. During the opening ceremony, a replica of the original 1966 World Cup trophy was brought onto the field. On one side, a representative of the German Football Association, and on the other, a representative of the English Football Association stood together. In a gesture that transcended decades of rivalry and historical baggage, they jointly unveiled a plaque commemorating the enduring spirit of competition and sportsmanship, acknowledging the complexities of the past and looking towards a future built on mutual respect. The plaque, simple yet profound, mentioned the 1966 final not as a moment of unblemished victory, but as a pivotal event that spurred advancements in officiating technology and fostered a deeper understanding of sporting ethics. It was a quiet, dignified acknowledgement, a final laying to rest of the ghost that had haunted generations. The final scene found the German character, now older, sitting on a park bench overlooking a vibrant youth football match. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pitch where children, oblivious to the historical controversies, chased the ball with pure, unadulterated joy. He watched them, a gentle smile gracing his lips. The image of the ball crossing the line, or not crossing the line, no longer tormented him. The burden had been lifted. The truth had been told. And the conversation had shifted from who was right or wrong to how to ensure fairness in the future. The ghost of 1966 was finally laid to rest, but its lessons remained, etched into the collective consciousness of football. It served as a perpetual reminder of the fallibility of human judgment, the immense pressure on those making split-second decisions, and the critical importance of embracing technological advancements to ensure justice on the field. More importantly, it underscored the value of relentless inquiry, the courage to challenge established narratives, and the ultimate triumph of truth over entrenched belief. The legacy of the 1966 World Cup final was no longer defined solely by a controversial goal, but by the decades-long journey to understand it and the eventual reconciliation that followed. It transformed from a point of contention into a powerful symbol of